All right, diving in today. Story's a bit dark. It's about Walter Hill, convicted serial killer, executed back in 97.
Yeah.
Listeners sent in this Wikipedia article about him, and it,
Mm.
it really brings up some interesting but kind of disturbing questions about,
Yeah.
human nature and all that.
It always gets me like trying to understand, how does someone get to that point? What makes a person capable of such awful things? Like, you try to get in their heads, figure out their motives. It's fascinating and disturbing all at once.
Absolutely. And with Walter Hill, you see this pattern of violence really early on. Court records show he was born Midway, Alabama in 1935,
Okay.
but he always claimed he was Jamaican.
Interesting.
And here's the thing. At just 17 years old, he beats a man named Sam Atmore to death.
Wow. You know, that early violence, it really makes you think about those theories, like the McDonald triad. Bedwetting, fire setting, cruelty to animals. Not saying all those apply to Hill, but they're often linked to violent behavior later in life. We don't know all the details of his childhood, but that kind of brutality at that age, that's a major red flag.
For sure, for sure. So for that murder, he gets sentenced to 10 years, ironically, at Moore State Prison Farm.
Oh, wow.
But prison couldn't hold him. He escapes shortly before transfer, gets caught again, but later escapes again during a prison baseball game.
Wait, what? A baseball game.
Yeah, with 19 other inmates. Like, you'd think someone would notice 20 guys running for the fences, right?
It's almost funny, like a scene out of a movie. But it shows you something about Hill. He was cunning, and he had zero respect for the rules. They did catch most of them eventually, but 3 were never found, just vanished.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what happened to those 3. But for now, let's stick with Hill. So after prison, he joins the Jamaican army. Remember, he claimed to be Jamaican,
Right.
but he gets a dishonorable discharge after only 9 months.
Doesn't exactly paint a picture of someone who follows the rules very well, does it?
Not exactly. And things just get worse from there. In 1962, Hill and another guy, they kidnap a man, Arthur Phillips, at gunpoint. They drive him across state lines to Alabama.
Oh, wow. So that's federal. Interstate transportation of a stolen vehicle right there.
Exactly. And then, get this, they force him out of the car and just drive off.
That's cold. Really cold. It's like each crime he commits, it makes him bolder, pushes him further down that dark path.
In prison, it seemed to just make things worse. While he's serving his 25-year sentence for that kidnapping, he fatally stabs another inmate.
Oh.
Convicted of manslaughter, gets another 5 years on top of his sentence. Like this vicious cycle.
Yeah. Makes you wonder about the prison system itself. Is it actually rehabilitating anyone, or is it just making them more aggressive? There's a big question, a whole other discussion, really.
We could do a whole deep dive on that for sure. But with Hill, his worst crimes, they were still to come.
This is where things get really dark. We're talking about Willie Mae Hammock and her family, including 13-year-old Tony, who Hill had been, quote-unquote, dating.
Yeah, that's where it takes a really disturbing turn, and you start to see just how manipulative he could be.
Yeah, so January 7th, 1977, Hill shows up at Willie Mae's house. He asks for permission to marry Tony.
Oh, God.
Now, you, the listener, you're probably already seeing the problem here. Grown man wanting to marry a 13-year-old Willie Mae. Thankfully, she refused.
Good for her. But that age difference, that alone, it's a huge red flag. Probably grooming her, coercive behavior, the whole 9 yards. Absolutely. And Hill's reaction to Willie Mae saying no, it's horrifying. He follows her into a bedroom and shoots her in the back of the head. Then he murders Willie Mae's daughter, Lois Jean Tatum, and her husband, John Tatum Jr., execution style. Shots to the back of the head.
God. The level of planning there, the coldness of it. This wasn't some, crime of passion. It was calculated, methodical.
And Tony, she was there. She saw the whole thing. Then he forces her to leave with him. They find Tony's adopted brother, Robert, force him to drive them towards Georgia. Can you imagine the trauma for these 2 young people?
It's unimaginable, really, to see that kind of violence and then be kidnapped by the person who did it. The psychological impact, it must have been devastating. But even in all that horror, Robert, he showed incredible courage.
He did. When the car breaks down in Villarica, Georgia, Robert, he sees his chance and he makes a run for it. He actually hitchhikes all the way back to Alabama to report the murders. Talk about bravery in the face of unimaginable fear.
Wow. His quick thinking, his bravery, it probably saved lives. It's like proof that even in the darkest situations, people can still find the strength to fight back.
I agree. But in the meantime, Hill and Tony, they're stranded. They come across this guy, Lewis Nunnery, and under threat of death, they force him to drive them towards South Carolina. Hill's desperate to escape, but that desperation's going to lead to his downfall.
Yeah, desperation can make people do some pretty reckless things. And in Hill's case, those mistakes, they're going to catch up to him.
So Hill's on the run, desperate to, get away with these awful crimes, but like we said, his luck's about to change.
Yeah, in this part, it really shows how strong the people he attacked were. Their
It
resilience.
really does. So Nunnery's car, it breaks down in North Carolina. And while Hill's asleep, Nunnery, he manages to get away, alerts the police, and guess what they find when they catch up with Hill? In his pocket.
Knowing what we know about him now, I bet it was the gun, the murder weapon.
Right on the money, the pistol used in all three murders. I mean, that's pretty much an open and shut case for the prosecution. So remember, Tony, Robert, and Lewis Nunnery, well, their nightmare wasn't over. All three of them, they had to testify against Hill.
Man, that must have been so difficult.
Yeah.
Got to relive all that trauma in a courtroom. But their testimonies, they were absolutely crucial to make sure justice was served.
Absolutely. Their courage is it's remarkable. And it paid off. October 1977, Hill's convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. You'd think that would be the end of it, right?
Yeah, you would. But the legal system, it can be a complicated thing.
It really can. And in this case, some technical errors during the trial, well, they ended up giving Hill a retrial.
Oh, wow. That's got to be frustrating. For the families, for everyone involved, to have it so close and then have it delayed like that.
It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure. So this retrial, it gives Hill another chance. And being the manipulator he is, what does he do? Tries to shift the blame, claims he wasn't even there when the murders happened.
Oh, come on.
Really? Yeah. He even suggests that Tony, Robert, or someone else could have done it.
It's classic, Try to create doubt, confuse the jury. It happens all the time. Thankfully, in this case, the jury saw right through it.
They did. August 1979, Hill is found guilty again, capital murder, gets his second death sentence. But then there's another twist. The judge who presided over the case, he died before he could sign the formal death sentence order.
What? Seriously, that's unbelievable. Just another delay, more heartache for everyone involved.
It's crazy, right? So it meant they had to have another sentencing hearing with a new judge. This time, in February 1980, the new judge, he upholds the previous ruling. Hill gets his third death sentence.
3 trials, 3 death sentences. So that's it, right? End of the line for Walter Hill.
Well, not quite. There are all kinds of appeals dragged on for years. But eventually, everything got exhausted, all the legal options. And Hill's execution date, it was set, May 2nd, 1997, at Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama. Walter Hill's reign of terror, it finally came to an end.
Wow. Almost 20 years between the murders and his execution. That's a long time.
Yeah.
The families, I can't imagine what they went through.
Yeah. It really shows you the lasting impact of these kinds of crimes. But before we get into the final moments of Hill's life and the bigger picture here, what are your thoughts on all this, all the legal back and forth?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey with a lot of twists and turns, but even with the execution, it still feels like there are questions left hanging,
Yeah, definitely. And for the victims' families, it's, closure, it's not always that simple. That pain, that loss, it sticks with you, no matter what happens in court.
That's true. But let's talk about those last few hours. Hill spent them with his wife, Irma F. Hill, and 2 of his nieces. His last meal, he asked for fried chicken and sweet potatoes.
Kind of strange, isn't it? Like that simple meal before facing, the end. It is. It's a strange contrast. Hill, he didn't say any final words, but he did nod to one of his nieces. She'd actually been a witness for him during the trial. None of the victims' families, they chose not to be there for the execution.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, seeing that, it wouldn't bring their loved ones back. It might even make the pain worse. It's complicated. Grief, justice, it's all tied together.
So May 2nd, 1997, Walter Hill was executed by electric chair. The end of his story for sure. But like we've been talking about, it brings up so many other issues. It really makes you think about human nature, doesn't it? The dark side of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to those big questions, right? Are some people just born evil?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they made that way by their environment, by society failing them? Could things have been different for Hill if someone had intervened early on? Those are tough questions, no easy answers.
They really are. And here's one more thing for you, the listener, to think about. We talked about Hill's violence, how it escalated over time. But what about the role of prison itself? Did it make him worse? Was it, like we said before, more about punishment than rehabilitation? Something to consider as we wrap up this case. It's been a dark one, that's for sure, but hopefully it's made you think and maybe do some exploring on your own. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a tough one, but an important one. The Walter Hill case, it shows us just how complex people can be, the horrible effects of violence, and how we need to keep questioning our justice system, and how we try to rehabilitate people.
Well said. And on that note, we'll end our deep dive into the life and crimes of Walter Hill. It's been heavy, but hopefully it's giving you something to think about and maybe even explore further. Thanks for listening.